answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth!
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth!
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
At least 1 million to 1.5 million Americans are legally entitled to use marijuana in the United States of America. That's right, we've got new estimates, new data. Thank you, studio audience. 1 to 1.5 million legal medical marijuana patients registered or with recommendations in the United States. And we estimate the market for these folks, 2 to 6 billion with a B, $billion a year. Now, we don't know who this person is, but America's 1 millionth medical marijuana patient was registered or recommended in 2011. It had to have happened early in January or February, but we now strongly believe there are at least 1 million legal marijuana users in the United States of America. Now, the way that we estimated that this would be worth $2 to $6 billion is by taking you have to guess on these things. You have to estimate. So we're assuming a usage of a half gram to a gram per day. And for a patient that might have to use a half gram to a gram, and we took an average retail price of $320 an ounce. I know some of you are laughing because that's too much. Some of you are laughing because it's too cheap. But, take an average, just say $320. And that works out to $2.3 billion to $6.2 billion worth of cannabis that people are using legally in the United States. Remember, all this is legal marijuana use. Now, the other thing I like to do with this, I like to plug numbers in. I'm a spreadsheet guy. And so I figured, hey, I wonder how much legal pot there is. Just how many legal plants and how much legal medicine could there be in the United States? So if you figure that, like in Oregon, we have 39,774 patients and we get to have 24 ounces apiece, you do the math, this times that, it works out to like half, 100,000, 500,000 ounces that we're allowed to have or so. And, take California, its patients, a million patients times 8 ounces. And again, that's the least they could be allowed to have. They could be allowed to have more. When you work all that out, you do all the math, it works out to between, and again, this is, we have to determine, how we're estimating how many patients there are, because we have to estimate California and Washington. So before I give you how much legal weed there is, let's talk about how many legal patients there are. We spoke with Dr. Dale Geringer from California Normal. He told us that, there's no central registry and there's no, everybody just gets recommendations. So you have to estimate this. But based on numbers from Colorado and Montana, he estimated that between 2 to 3% of the overall population of California have medical marijuana recommendations. Well, 2 to 3%, that works out to 750,000 to 1.125 million. So somewhere between that, about 1 million people in California. Well, for Washington State, I had to come up with an estimate as well. Now, Washington doesn't have a registry. It's the only state without one, although the governor did just pass a law that, or sign a law that will institute a voluntary registry. But right now they have no registry. So I had to figure that Washington's got to have at least as many patients as Oregon, because the laws are pretty similar as far as what qualifying conditions, although Washington has a couple more than we don't have. But still, the laws are pretty similar. The people, the cultures are pretty similar. So I figure at least 1% of Washington State have cards or recommendations, and that would be 67,000 people. And maybe as high as 1.5%. And I'm willing to make that estimate because, well, they've got bigger urban centers in Washington State. You got Seattle area and you got the Spokane area, right? So big cities tend to have more medical marijuana use. And also because they have kind of a fledgling dispensary system and more doctors could recommend. I mean, osteopaths, naturopaths, and nurse practitioners can recommend in Washington State. So there may be as high as 1.5% of the population. That works out to 100,000 users in Washington State. Now, for the rest of the states, we've got good numbers because they have registries. Oregon, 39,774. In Alaska, just 380 patients. In Maine, just 796. In Nevada, just 860. In Hawaii, around 8,000. Now, Hawaii's numbers are tough to come by. They do have a registry, but it's through law enforcement. It's through the Department of Public Safety, and they don't really like giving those kind of numbers out. So again, I got in touch with Pam Lichty from Drug Policy Forum Hawaii. She says about 8,000 patients. I'm willing to believe that. Colorado, they've got a registry, 123,890 patients. Vermont, 349. Montana, 30,609. Rhode Island, 3,069. New Mexico, 3,615. Michigan, 75,521. And Arizona, 3,696. That works out to 1.1 to 1.5 million legal marijuana users in the United States, legally entitled to use cannabis. All right, so how much medicine could these people have? 1.1 to 1.5 million legal medical marijuana patients are allowed to cultivate between 17 and 24 million plants. There are 17 to 24 million possible, potential, allowed under state law cannabis plants growing out there. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's growing to their max, probably aren't, but that's what's possible. Anywhere from 17 to 24 million legal plants. And as far as possession amounts, it works out to between 566 and 803,000 pounds of legal usable cannabis allowed under state law. And since New Mexico and California will actually allow you to have more than their statutory limits if your doctor says it's okay, and there's also counties like Oakland and places in California where they let you have more, like Oakland lets you have 3 pounds, right? So with that, it's possible there might be 1 million pounds of state legal cannabis allowed under state law. 1 million pounds. So we're talking about 1 million legal users growing up to 24 million legal plants and possessing up to 1 million pounds of legal marijuana. And yet, in those 16 states in the District of Columbia, the trains still run on time. There's not pot zombies roaming the streets. There's not cats and dogs living together in disasters of biblical proportion. In fact, life goes on pretty much the way it went on before we instituted medical marijuana. In fact, none of the dire predictions by our opponents about what would happen if we legalized marijuana, none of them have come to fruition here. For example, one of the things they used to say to us is, oh my God, we cannot legalize medical marijuana. What about the children? What kind of message are you sending to the children? My God, if we legalize medical marijuana, kids will think pot's okay. And the next thing you know, we'll have teenage pot zombies roaming the streets in search of strains. Well, actually, when you look at the data, and the government keeps track of this stuff, right? The National Survey on Drug Use and Health from the University of Michigan, they track this stuff every year. I compared the year that these states passed medical marijuana versus the most current year, which is 2008 data, and what was the monthly usage rate for 12 to 17-year-olds before medical and after medical. And in every state except Maine, in every medical marijuana state except Maine, teenage use went down. Use went down. And in the states that have the biggest medical marijuana populations, the Michigan, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Montana, those figures went down by 10% or more of 12 to 17-year-olds using cannabis. Now, I'm not trying to say correlation equals causation here. I'm not trying to say that, because we passed medical marijuana, less kids are using pot. But what I am saying is what they predicted medical marijuana would lead to more kids using pot, the data doesn't show that. Here's another thing they predicted. Oh my God, if we legalize medical marijuana, there'll be stoned drivers on the freeways. There'll be mayhem on the streets. There'll be blood in the intersections. But again, this really hasn't turned out either. I decided to take a look at the highway fatalities. How many people died on the roads in the year that medical marijuana was passed in these states versus how many people died on the roads in 2009. This is data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, right? And I'm not talking deaths per 100 million miles driven, right? So even as populations have gone up and more people are driving, and they're driving more, in every state, fatalities went down except Rhode Island. In every medical marijuana state, fatalities went down. And in Rhode Island, in 2006, they had 81 fatalities. In 2009, they had 83. So it went up by 2 people, right? In these other states, we look at California, in 1996, they had 3,900 traffic fatalities. In 2009, they had 3,000. They went down by 908 fewer deaths on the road. In Washington state, went down from 662 to 492. Oregon went down from 538 to 377. Now again, I'm not saying medical marijuana made these streets safer. Right? There's all sorts of other things that happen too. Drunk driving patrols, increased use of seat belts, more patrols, etc. Sure, lots of other reasons. But again, the dire prediction from our opponents that medical marijuana would lead to greater fatalities, would lead to greater risks on the road, do not seem to be played out in the data. And one other thing our opponents used to like to say, that, well, if we legalized medical marijuana, it would cause havoc in the workplace. There'd be more injuries, it'd be a safety risk, and productivity would go down. Well, in all the medical marijuana states, since they passed medical marijuana, the GDP, the gross domestic product of those states, they've all gone up. But despite that, let's take a look at OSHA data, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Workplace injuries and illnesses. How many workplace injuries and illnesses were there in a medical marijuana state when they passed medical versus how many were there in 2009? In every medical marijuana state for which there is data, every single one of them, workplace injuries and illnesses declined. California went from 7.1% to 4.2%. Washington state went from 9.2% to 5.3%. We're doing it live. New software, we're working it out. We'll get this all good for you. But the point remains, workplace injuries have gone down in every medical marijuana state. Workplace illnesses have gone down in every medical marijuana state for which there is data. Now here's just some quick facts as we round up the day here. The 17 jurisdictions where we have medical marijuana encompass 90 million Americans. That's right, 90 million Americans live in medical marijuana states, and that makes up 162 votes in the Electoral College. Patients make up over 3% of the population in Montana, almost 2.5% in Colorado, 2% in California, and over 1% in Oregon and Washington. After Michigan, at 0.75%, every other medical marijuana state has less than 0.3% registered patients. So really, there's 6 big states for medical marijuana. California, Colorado, Washington, Michigan, Oregon, and Montana comprise 98% of the legal medical marijuana users, and more than 3 out of 4 legal medical marijuana patients live on the West Coast. And again, monthly teen use down, highway fatalities down, workplace injuries down.
This is Normal Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
All right, all that data is available up at our main page at normal.org. Check it out and spread the word. We are winning. There's 1 million of us, and there's going to be 1 million more before you know it. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for Hour 2. For Ganja John, Clego the Intern, and Cannabis Carry, I'm Radical Russ. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.